Well, good afternoon. It is nap time, so we're going to try to get into the activities very quickly. Today we're going to talk about making sense of text, research-based strategies for improving reading comprehension. I do notice some familiar faces from earlier. There'll be a few slides that will be similar, but then we'll go deeper into some of those areas that I talked about earlier. There are the slides. If, especially in the back of the room, it may be helpful for you to have those on your phone. I hope they work. The permissions on one of the codes didn't work this morning. If not, I can definitely email these to you, and they'll be available later as well. Did it work?
It says I can't sign into Middle Tennessee.
You should have allowed it. All right, I will send that link. You guys will have these, promise. All right, we're going to jump right in. I'd like you to read this text, and I want you to think about what would a student have difficulty with in this text. This is The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak.
Sentence complexity.
Okay, there are some definitely some clauses in here that are difficult. Absolutely. What else?
Vocabulary, figurative language.
Vocabulary is key to almost every text that you're reading, and this one in particular, he uses language in a very different way. So, what else? And background knowledge. What do you need to know to understand this particular text? Okay, so you have to make the inference here that the narrator is deaf. Okay, Marcus Zusak actually wrote this text or started to write this story without the narrator being deaf, and he changed it, and it actually, I think, made the story come to life with that decision. What else? What is the genre of this book? It's historical fiction fantasy, because we've got the right? So genre matters to kids. Like understanding, for instance, science fiction or fantasy, that you're immediately put into a world and you don't know what's going on for the first 3 chapters. If no one tells you that, you're like, that's too hard, that's too difficult, I don't want to do that. I don't know, I love science fiction, but if I thought the whole book was going to be like that, I wouldn't continue to read, right? So understanding genre helps as well. So, of course, and no one mentioned, you got to be able to get those words off the page, right? You need that decoding and word recognition. Language. You guys mentioned vocabulary, but we've got syntax, morphology, semantics, reasoning skills, right? Understanding that death is the narrator there. Take a lot of inferencing skills. Executive function, metacognition, self-regulation, attention, working memory. You guys nailed this one. Vocabulary is going to be really important. Content knowledge, background knowledge, print knowledge, and overall motivation is going to come into play. So today, we're going to cover a little bit of an overview of what comprehension is, and then those essential elements. We're going to spend a lot of time on vocabulary, knowledge, and inference generation, because these are 3 key areas that we see across research that can make a meaningful difference for kids. And then we're going to talk just a little bit about overcoming some of the barriers, like limited time and students' motivation. A little bit about me. I started off in the Department of Defense schools as a paraprofessional in special education, working with children in grades 3 through 5. I learned so much. It was like student teaching for 2 years with the best of the best. So I learned a tremendous amount from those teachers that I worked with. At the time, I was getting my degree in psychology with a minor in education. We ended up in North Carolina after that. And I worked for 2 years as a 7th grade inclusion, and I had a couple of self-contained classes during that time. This is where I met Clifton, and Clifton could only read his name when he showed up at my door. I didn't know what I was doing, so it took 6 months for me to figure out that I needed to use systematic phonics to teach Clifton how to read, because I was not prepared for that. And back in the day, we didn't have the internet sources, so I spent a lot of time at the parent-teacher store. I spent time in libraries, creating materials. By the end of that year, his 7th grade year, I'd say Clifton was on just over a 1st grade level. So I go back and I think, what could I have done for this kid if I had known what I was doing when I walked in the door? My next placement was we moved to Nashville, and I worked at a school that was D.D. Wallace, where children that were zero toleranced out of their school of zone, but still needed special ed services, came to us. So many of these kids had done some kind of violent act in schools. And so when I was interviewing for the job, there was the ODD classroom, oppositional defiant classroom, or the ADHD classroom. I was really hoping I'd get the ADHD classroom, but maybe when your choices are ODD and ADHD, you should rethink your career path. I learned a tremendous amount during those years about behavior and then differentiation for the kids, and there was a wide variety in my classroom. I had kids that were reading on grade level, and I had kids that were reading it maybe at a 2nd or 3rd grade level. And so I knew how to take care of the systematic explicit phonics piece. I could do that, but I didn't know how to do comprehension. So kids would read something. Often we would read aloud because so many levels in a classroom that we needed to have them to have access to the text. So for reading comprehension, we'd read. We'd answer questions. And what I'd find is that the kids couldn't answer the questions, and I didn't know why. My go-to strategy was literally read it again. Just read it again. Like, I couldn't see where are they struggling. Now I understand that comprehension is a very complex process, and that's why I couldn't identify all of those pieces. It's taken me 15 years now that I've been working, because I went back to school to find out how to do this, and I have spent the last maybe longer than 15 years now, trying to figure out what works in comprehension, what does the research say, and how can we translate that to practice? Because I don't want teachers to go in and have that same feeling, like I don't really know what to do here. And now I'm the director of the Literacy Studies PhD program, so if any of you are interested in getting your PhD, please see me after. Always trying to recruit people who are interested in, especially in reading comprehension. Because this program really is about learning how to do good research, but then how to translate it for people to make it useful. All right, so let's do that overview. What do you notice about these two lines? They're pretty flat, right? This is our NAEP data from 1971 to 2020 for 9 and 13-year-olds. We don't see much of a bump there. We actually saw in 2022, our data went down. You guys probably all heard about this, right? But it definitely impacted some students differently than others. So if you're looking at, this is the 10th percentile, this is the 90th percentile, this is the drop in points. Who did it impact the most? Lowest readers, right? We know that overall, in general, not even students with reading difficulties, but overall, only 50% of students are ready for college-level text when they leave high school. And only 37%, according to NAEP, say that they're prepared for college, okay? Those are very dismal numbers. So why? Well, part of that is that complexity of reading comprehension, and then that makes it difficult to assess it. It makes it difficult to instruct. It makes it difficult to get that translation of research to practice. We have over 100 years of reading comprehension work, research. 40 years of really high quality studies trying to answer what works in reading comprehension. Yet very little of that has made it into the classroom. So what is reading comprehension? I really like the RAND they have a really good definition. It's the process of simultaneously extracting and constructing meaning through the interaction and involvement with written language. And that extracting and constructing is really important. Being able to see that text, take it, understand it, from what you know and what the text is trying to tell you, to marry those two things is difficult. I like, this is Young-Suk Kim's work. This is, if you'll notice, this should look familiar. Word reading and listening comprehension, and we get reading comprehension. What is that? What's it? The simple view, that's right. And what I like about Young-Suk's work is that she's also including these foundational skills. So we can imagine here you've got general skills and executive function, like working memory, inhibition, attentional control. And on this side, where our comprehension lies here, we have that higher order cognition. So we have inference, perspective taking, reasoning, monitoring. And then we have those foundational language skills, vocabulary, grammar. And you can see that it still affects this side, right? We still have over here our phonics side with when we look at orthography, phonology, and morphology. There's still this, there's an interaction here, right? All of this is taking place thinking about the backdrop of content, world, and discourse knowledge, and those socio-emotional regulation skills. And of course, fluency requires both of these things, right? And if we don't have either of these columns or a foundation, what happens? No house, right? And so when you look at this, no wonder I couldn't pick up. There are many reasons why students struggle. And it could be for any. If one of these goes wrong, you're not going to get comprehension. So today I'm going to talk about 3 areas. This is kind of the how-to session. So we're going to talk about vocabulary, inference, or knowledge, and inference. All 3 of these have been shown to really impact reading comprehension. So vocabulary. I love this Voltaire quote. So true. All right, so tell me, what do you think on a scale of 1 to 10, what is the relationship between vocabulary and comprehension? 9.4, I love it. 50 to 60, okay? Those are good numbers. We see a strong correlation, a 0.6 to a 0.8. Psychometricians would say that these are almost the same thing. Okay, with that high of a correlation, these are pretty much the same construct. But why? Why? Because there are multiple reasons. It could be, if you know the vocabulary, then your comprehension is better. I can buy that, right? And if we teach vocabulary, your comprehension gets better. Very clear. We call that the instrumentalist hypothesis, so that vocabulary directly impacts comprehension. Makes sense, but guess what? There's a ton of other things that could be causing this relationship. Imagine that you have a lot of knowledge, right? You have knowledge, but the tip of that iceberg, and I think I actually have that, the tip of this iceberg is the vocabulary you know, but actually underneath is all this knowledge, right? So it could be that it's actually the knowledge that's impacting both your vocabulary, right, and your comprehension. Or it could be that your verbal abilities. Children who have better verbal abilities will get better at vocabulary easier, but guess what? That's also going to help their comprehension. Now, when we did a meta-analysis I'm going to share in a minute, we actually found that just a little bit of our variance, or what we could explain, about 40% was the relationship between vocabulary and comprehension, the direct relationship. That means we got a lot of other things that could explain what's going on. And I really do think knowledge is a part of that. Verbal ability certainly, but knowledge I think is, and so I'm going to really push when you're thinking about vocabulary, you're actually thinking about vocabulary and knowledge tied together. This is an example of a network here. So this is the word illusion. And here are all the words that co-occur in a large corpus. So they take like tons of data and text, and they look to see, well, what's co-occurring with illusion, right? So I imagine, and what's been theorized, is that this is kind of how our mind holds our mental lexicon, how the words and the knowledge are related and stored. And the more nodes that you have, the more likely that you're going to be able to pull that information quickly, right? And so illusion with myth, or it co-occurs with impression. So as we get through this vocabulary piece, I want you to think about not just, when we teach vocabulary, not just trying to put one entry in a child's head, but trying to teach one in which we get multiple entries, trying to mimic what we imagine is actually happening in your mental lexicon. Unfortunately, we see, and you guys know this, how many of you are in the classroom? Okay. So we know that there are these vast individual differences. When kids come into school, we see that kids at the end of second grade, that students in the lower quartile lag 2 years behind students, the average students, and 4 years behind students in the upper quartile. Okay, that's a huge difference that they start off with. And we also know that there are these large individual differences in the amount of independent reading that students do. There are about 88,000 word families in printed school English, and some people, there are debates on what counts as a word and all of that fun stuff, but I go with Nagy here. Children learn 1,000 to 3,000 words per year. That's about 10 to 15 words per day. Okay, I'm not seeing any shock. When I saw this the first time, I said, that cannot be true. Because I'm teaching 10 words a week, and they're learning maybe 75% of those. So I'm lucky to get 300 to 400 words a year, right? So how is this possible, right? Now we have some modeling that's been done to show that actually, when thinking in this network kind of framework, that when we learn one concept, it connects to another concept, and it connects to another one. So we might not even directly see that word again, but if we see anything in that network, it actually shores that up, and we learn gradually over time. That's how we learn all of the words that most of us know. But where are we learning those words? Where do you guys think, where are people from 5th grade on, or let's say, where are they getting the words, the rare words? So we would think it would be language, right? Unfortunately, and this needs to be redone, I keep trying to find a doc student to redo this, but here are the number of rare words per 1,000. And so we have scientific articles. Okay, you're going to get some words there. But let's look at, where's my speech? Adult speech. 17.3 rare words per 1,000. So what do you see? Where do words, like children's books, almost double adult speech. So our words, our rare words, are coming only through written text, written formal text, whether that's audio books or read alouds or reading. The only way that we're going to be exposed to rare words is to look at written text. So it becomes important. Imagine those kids that start off so far behind and then they don't read. Imagine the growth, right? Then we have what we call the Matthew effects, right? The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. And I noticed this. So while I was in my doc program, I decided to have a baby. I don't know that I recommend that, but it was interesting because I was reading all of these great children's books, right, and thinking about all of this vocabulary, not believing that we actually learn 10 to 15 words a day. But then I started to look at text, and I was like, oh, wait a second. So this was one example that I was reading to my daughter at the time. Mama, red pajama. We've got words like tune, fret, whimpers, moan, tizzy. I don't use those words, right? Why don't I use those words probably in daily conversation? They're not, usually when we're talking to one another, we just want it to be simple, right? We want communication to happen. We're not thinking about informal text. We use language differently, right? We use it for precision and for flair and all of these, other reasons for writing, that we're only going to see these rare words. It actually, it would be better to read children's books than it would to be just to talk to kids. All right, to get the next part, I've got to tell you a little bit about how to interpret effect sizes. So I do a lot of work in meta-analysis. Meta-analysis is, how many people know what a meta-analysis is? I know people who were here earlier got a whole session on meta-analysis. So a meta-analysis is we take all the studies that have been conducted in an area and we synthesize across all those studies and we come up with what we call an estimate of the effect. That effect is called an effect size. So we can tell, we can look at even across all different kinds of measures, we put them all on the same scale and we're like, okay, and we can say this is effective or not effective based on that effect size. So, and this is from my point of view, from a researcher's point of view, if you get a small effect size, which would be about a 0.2, I'm dancing in the office because I can probably get the piece published. If I get this 0.5, I'm dancing in the street because that's something I need to tell people about. Like, this is something we should be doing with kids. And then if I get a 0.8, I actually tell my doc students, don't ever trust anything if you see a 0.8 or above, because it's very rare. Some early studies actually do show it because the control groups often aren't getting anything. Nowadays, if you see that, you should definitely investigate further. So I'm dancing on the moon, though. If I get a 0.8, I'm dancing on the moon. So let's look at some of the effects on this was a meta-analysis on the impact of vocabulary instruction on reading comprehension. And so we have standardized measures. We don't get much of an effect on standardized measures. Why wouldn't we? If you teach certain words and then they take a Gates-McGinnity or a Woodcock-Johnson or one of the other tests that we have out there, why might we not see an effect? The words you taught are probably not going to show up there, right? So it kind of makes sense. For a long time, though, it was very much promoted that we should should expect effects there. On custom measures, when the words are contained in the passages that we're asking kids, we see that we actually get that 0.5. Where am I dancing? We're in the street. We got to tell people about this. This is important. But what really I think was of interest to me is when I separated the students that didn't have a risk of reading difficulties and students who had reading difficulties. So with no identified risk, you are at a 0.39. Okay, that's good. We still need to do it. I'm not dancing in the street, but it's important. But look at when you have students who have reading difficulties, look at the effect size. Okay, it is extremely important that when we're working with kids who have reading difficulties that we focus on vocabulary. They're probably not going to get much out of the text that you're reading. Unfortunately, we have, in the observational studies that have been done, 5 minutes is dedicated in ELA and social studies classes, about 5 minutes is dedicated to vocabulary. And most of that in another observation study showed that it's mostly definitions and worksheets. Okay, so that's problematic. I like to use a framework because vocabulary is so huge. It's like, well, what do I need to do in my classroom now? So I like to think about this framework that Stahl and Nagy came up with. That at level 1, we need that language-rich environment, right? We need to think carefully about the words we're using and try to use more sophisticated speech. But also we need to encourage that wide reading. Suppose kids are still at they're young or they have dyslexia, we want those kids actually working through listening comprehension at that point. They need to be at their oral language level so that they continue to develop vocabulary and knowledge and not be stunted because they don't have access, right? So this is important, this first level. This second level, we want to teach independent word learning strategies. So we need to teach explicitly how to use context clues now this isn't using context clues to learn to do phonics or word recognition. Let's make that clear. This is for the semantics piece of it, right? We need kids to be thinking about what do these words mean. They need to get access to those words. They need to say, I don't know what this word is. What could it be with the text surrounding? Unfortunately, only 15% to 20% of the time can you figure out a word from context. However, it's such an important skill for them to pick up over time that I still think it's worth teaching. We also need to teach things like morphemic analysis. I'm going to give you some examples in a second of that because we can do that systematically and explicitly. It's one of those things in comprehension where I'm like, okay, this is one we can do. explicitly and systematically. And then we need that direct instruction, key content terms, and general high utility vocabulary. So let's look at some examples. This is an example of level 1 where we're just trying to get them to love words and notice words. So daily idioms are great there, and they're really great for ELs, right? Or multi-language learners. Like, they won't understand the cat's got your tongue unless you explicitly teach that, right? So you can just have a cartoon up on the screen when kids come in for the day. These are fun ones, and you can find more on Reading Rockets. Also, wordplay books. I don't know if you guys grew up with it. Well, some of you, Amelia Bedelia. Yeah. Kids still love those, right? I also like this particular book. It has SAT words, and it has cartoons for each of those. So that's an easy way to just display those cartoons to the kids every day. We want to make this fun, right? We want to make it enjoyable. Often, how many people have used Wordly Wise? Okay, I like Wordly Wise's scope and sequence. I actually like the procedures in there. Kids hate it too. So we've got to bring that to life in some way. I still have the set and I still use it, but I've got to use other activities, and we've got to do that together. Just handing them a Wordly Wise book, they will hate vocabulary. This is an example of level 2, that morphemic analysis. So we need to teach those affixes. So these are the top 20 affixes in the English language. And their meaning. And then we also, though, have to think about the root words. Because, we can get the outside. That's pretty easy. But we've got to think, this is where we could be very systematic. So the AWL is, I think, very useful. This on here, this link. So instead of, you've got abandon, but actually we have a lot of words, right? If we teach abandon, we've got a ton of words that they're learning. We're thinking about that network, not just one entry, but multiple entries. And I think this is a good way to do that. That's the sublist 8. So they give you each of these at the levels that you need. Here's an example of level 3. This is getting to word precision. How many of you have used a semantic gradient before? Okay, great. And Reading Rockets has a great example. The videos are so cute. So, and if any of you ever do training, the videos on this are adorable. In my workshops, we go through and we watch these, and then we do a few of these. And everyone always disagrees with me on my answers there. They say, I think it's hop and pounce. They disagree. So at the bottom, you have jump, and then you have vault, and then where do these fit in between that, right? Hop is more than jump and pounce. And it really isn't the order that's important. It's the discussion around it, because then kids are actually actively producing and using this language. Another example, and this had actually the largest effect in our meta-analysis, was a semantic feature analysis. How many of you have ever used a semantic feature analysis? Okay, they're difficult to put together. I will just tell you that. But once you have them, if you're always working like Henry and Mudge was, we were working on Doug Fuchs's project, and we were using Henry and Mudge, and so I decided to develop this for the kids. And so, I didn't realize that Chihuahuas actually have floppy and pointed ears, so I learned a bunch in this activity. But here I'm trying to teach them floppy, hefty, miniature, right? And then also these different kinds of dogs. And so the students work together. They put pluses, minuses, and whether it's true or not, and then question marks. And then while they're reading, if it comes up in reading, we can answer that, or we can answer it, going on the internet and looking. But it's making them go and be searching for that information and engaging in the text. This is an example for older kids. This is for the book thief. So on this side, you have people, and this side, we have things that happen to people, but we have words like internment, crematorium, swastika. So in this way, we can find out what do students already know at the beginning and what do they need to know. So you can do this before, during, or after reading. So again, I want you guys to think about not just giving a single entry when we're doing vocabulary. You can do that, like it's great, at least they're getting instruction and explicit instruction. But think about how can I do this is a group of words. So using a thesaurus instead of a dictionary, these days they're together and you get the audio online, which is terrific. But if we're thinking in thesaurus terms, like we can look up the word and then there's a bunch of terms that I might know one of those and link what I know, but then I'm learning and seeing all of them grouped together. So now I'm creating that semantic network. This is an example of for young kids in preschool. This was done by David Dickinson's student, Hadley. And what they did is that they wanted to see, so typically in preschool, you know, we've got topics of the week. You know, you're doing spring, like showers. You guys, you know, it's preschool, right? And what they looked at is, well, what if we gave these kids a framework to work from as we're teaching this vocabulary? Will that improve how much vocabulary they're actually learning? So they gave the kids the regular, you know, topics and did that. And then they used this framework. And they learned that, you know, growing things, well, that vegetables, that a radish is a vegetable and an artichoke is a vegetable, but a tangerine is not a vegetable, right? And so they learned to group these in a semantic network. They did the read alouds first, and then in that first encounter is when they went through and said, okay, what's the taxonomy membership, right? What isn't it? So a radish is a vegetable, but a radish doesn't have seeds, so it's not a fruit, okay? So it's trying to develop this knowledge network that then students, as they learn something new, they can put it in a place. There's a hook to hang it on then. They learn the perceptual features. What does it look like? What does it taste like? And then how do people use it? People usually eat radishes. Then they did some play activities, guided play, where they were using the terms with the facilitator. And they also had gestures that they used for each of the words. And they got really good effects, like compared to what you typically get, kids were able to learn how these things were associated and they could bring more words into their knowledge network because they had a framework to work with. And that was even young kids, because you think about, well, I'm going to teach taxonomies to preschoolers, but they were able to do that. I really like Freddie Hebert's work in vocabulary, and she has these great, on her site, textproject.org, it will be at the end. She has different words for each of these categories. So this can help students not only learning their vocabulary, but also for writing, right? Because they're going to learn all about the different emotions. Instead of using mad or angry, they've got a ton of words that, you know, you could have a word wall that has all of the, you know, irritated, all of the things. You could actually do a semantic gradient for those words so that students can see the words. They have now a full network, but they can be precise in their writing as well. I like Beck and McCowan's work as well. You guys, how many people have read or know about? Great. So we want high utility. We want to pick out high utility words. So tier 1, you know, are most familiar. Dog, sad. Kids know these. We don't really need to cover these. But at tier 2, these are important across the curriculum. So examples are like identify and clever. These can be used across academic areas. Tier 3 are these rare words like mitosis and industrialization. And we only need to spend time at those when we're in that content. So tell me, what are the problems with this?
Well, because not everybody has the same, you know, background knowledge and knowledge in and of itself that, you know, to come in and all solidify at tier 2. So an ELL.
That's exactly right. So if we have an EL student or we have a student with a language delay, right, they may need this. It's like we can't, you know, so we have to know the students in front of us too, and that's what makes this difficult, is knowing what students know and what they don't know. And here we have to teach these in what? Expository text, right? So this works really well, I think, for narrative. In expository, I think we have to think a little bit beyond the tiers. the way I like to do this is I think about first in my lesson, suppose, now I'm going to have the AWL, the morphology work. That's just going to be something we do every day. But then, we're going to do, not long, 10 minutes maybe out of our session. And then when we're in a text, I have to think about, is my focus comprehension for them? Like, where's my focus? What am I trying to do with this text? Am I going to be working on strategies and comprehension, or is this really a vocabulary piece? And the reason is because you could, like the book thief, we're going to look at it in a second, you can pick out a lot of words, like a lot of words. You could spend your whole session, just a whole, 50 minutes or an hour and a half, just on vocabulary. So you got to figure out, where are you spending your time? And if it's a comprehension focus, those students still need to understand it, so I have to look for words that are central to meaning. And then I got to know, is this a word that they know? I had a whole group of students. We were doing a intervention study, and one group, we would read, and I'd say, okay, what words don't you know? Because the first strategy was clarify. And they're like, oh, we know all the words. Okay, so then I would prompt, well, if there was a word that I would pick that I didn't think you'd know, which word, and that sounds complicated, but they got it after a while. What word would I pick that you don't know? They'd pick a word and I'd say, so what's that word mean? I don't know. The other group, we had a clarifier, so she would pick out every word. So in that group, they were moving along just fine, right? But in this other group, I had to prompt every single session. By the end of 20 sessions, they were starting to prompt themselves. It took that long for them, because at first, I think we went through 75% of the lessons. I actually went to my advisor, it was Don Compton at the time, and I said, hey, they're not getting it. Like, this group is not getting it. I think it's wrong to keep doing this. And he goes, just give it time. This is the way we do research. We have to, go through it. If I had been a teacher, I would have stopped, because I would have said, no, they're not getting it. This isn't the right instruction for them. Thank goodness I learned that, okay, some people just take a lot longer. And by the end, they were getting it. And so I'm like, okay, like you just have to keep going a lot of times with students, because that prompting, they knew after a while they'd look at me and go, oh, she's just going to prompt, so we might as well just find some words. So it worked. All right, if the focus is vocabulary, is this a high utility word? Can you use morphemic analysis or context clues? There aren't many examples in text. You got to pick them out to practice the strategies in text. Because if you only practice morphology separate from it, it becomes an activity in and of itself, but not something they can apply while they're in real text. So you've got to have them doing it in authentic text after you've done it, of course, explicitly. And then, can I use this word or phrase to develop that word consciousness? Every once in a while, words are just cool. We want them to see, oh, words are cool. Where did this word come from? Why is he using this word here? All right, here's an example from the book thief. So which words would you say are central to the meaning of this text and is new to students?
Amiable.
Protestations. I know, I was going to say, I'm going to.
Okay, all of those words can be taught. Which ones are essential for understanding? I think you guys had them at the first. Let's see so what about a high utility word? Which ones are high utility? Which ones will you find across different kinds of texts and academic areas? Hindered, yep. Agreeable, amiable if they're older, right? Maybe. Okay, let's see. This is what I came up with here. I think that this is the way that I actually go through to put a lesson together. It just helps me to have it right in the text and have everything ready, because I don't want pieces and parts all over. It's got to be simple. So the way I do this is I'll be like, okay, the yellow, these are two words that I can easily tell them a word, a synonym, as we're reading, right? Hindered means blocked, for instance, and protestations means declarations. That they wouldn't know that word. Statements is probably what I would say there. And then here, context clues. I can use context clues for amiable, agreeable, and affable, right? So I just put a CC up there. And then for morphological analysis, aforementioned is probably not central to the text, but if I'm doing vocabulary, I'm thinking, hey, I want to, have an instance here to teach this. I would then use this one here. So I think we came up with the same words because they're good at this. Here's that word about dictionaries. Dictionaries are hard for students. They should be student friendly, but I really suggest having them focus on the thesaurus because you get more entries and there's likely to be a word here that they know to understand that word. And it also, I really love now that we have the technology, you hit the button and it will tell them how it sounds, how you say it. I do that sometimes for myself. All right, so tips for vocabulary instruction. We did see that smaller groups get larger effects. And that's because students can talk and produce and they can get feedback, right? And there's higher levels of feedback in those small groups. Be intentional about that word selection. Teach words explicitly. Using those student-friendly definitions or synonyms. Provide multiple exposures in multiple contexts. Encourage students to notice and appreciate words and increase their reading volume or their listening volume. That's appropriate too. When kids don't have access to text, giving them books on tape, Audible, like those are really important experiences for them to have. Explicitly teach those morphological skills and word families, and think about developing a semantic network instead of just a single entry. So we've got that tip of the iceberg, and now we're moving down, right? Knowledge. New knowledge is dependent on previous knowledge. You have to integrate these. Well-connected memory stores allow quicker retrieval, okay, for making inferences. If you have a lot of knowledge in an area, imagine all these nodes, it's much easier for you to understand and be able to make an inference than if your knowledge network is sparse. We know it is an important predictor of reading comprehension. Readers who possess more knowledge of a topic have better comprehension and retention at the end than those with lower levels. And even limited knowledge, like a title, helps a student or a person understand a text. We do see that teaching knowledge and integrating that with strategy instruction, integrated literacy and content instruction has very positive effects. So vocabulary, where are we dancing there? Definitely on the moon. Comprehension, that's pretty good, like I'm getting there. And then content knowledge. So integrating these two things is very useful for kids. Unfortunately, in grades K through 3, we have 50% of the time being spent in language arts, okay? And I'm not against, I'm an ELA person, I want them doing reading. However, look what happens to science and social studies. Okay, so we're doing maybe a good job getting kids to be able to read. We're using hopefully all those great early reading foundational skills. We're getting those up and going, but we're neglecting their knowledge. Because if they don't have this knowledge, guess what? By 8th grade or even 5th grade, they're not able to do much with these subjects because they haven't had enough, right? Because we haven't built that. Same thing, grades 4 through 6. This is the amount of time we're spending in those subject areas. So we really need to think about how can we use expository informational text in themed units where they're building that in our ELA classes. I'm all about narrative as well. I actually like to do narrative with expository in all of my interventions. That's how I do. It's like, because some kids are motivated more by narrative, some are more motivated by expository. So we do both. There it is. So this is one of the examples with the lightning thief and then ancient Greece. We also have done ancient Egypt, and we'll have different texts there. We'll have narrative and expository. Which one do you think you should do first? How many people say expository? How many people say narrative? Okay, we have like one research study on this. We have no idea. All right, one way to activate and assess knowledge is to use anticipation guides, questions, pictures, and short videos. Just make sure these things are short. We don't want to teach them everything they're going to learn in the text, or that why would you continue reading the text? So we want to just give them a taste of it, making them want to go in and learn more. This is an anticipation guide, so you put the statement here, and then they agree and disagree and see if their feelings about it changed by the end. Keep it brief, and then during reading, the majority of the time we want to build students' knowledge through interactions with the text. We just talked about this. That's what I'm ahead of myself. Okay, this is another tool that I think is very useful. We see pretty large effects for organizational strategies, graphic organizers, and I don't think it's necessarily the graphic organizers that's that's causing the effect on comprehension. I think it's allowing, just like we saw in the Hadley study, it's allowing the students to have a framework to understand and then build knowledge, right? It's not, you can see, suppose we're doing sequence, there's a better one. Here's the taxonomies again. We now have a place to put all of these things. They're learning how scientists think about classification. And that expert knowledge is what's transferring to comprehension, and they're able to build better structures because of that. I really like the Florida Center for Reading Research. They have a great, have you guys seen the books on? Okay, they're great. Like if you want to teach text structure, use graphic organizers, they've got a whole series for different age kids. You can literally download all of the materials, the worksheets, everything. And that's on here, yes.
So I have a quick question. There's some argument about utilizing a variety of organizers out there. Is there anything that says, hey, you need to kind of pare it down to just a handful of organizers, or is it okay to use variation?
It's a great, because text often there's not just one text structure in a text. So, and there was actually a study done. They did 21 graphic organizers, and they had the kids choose between those when looking at the text. It got very small effects. Because I've often thought you really should let kids choose, because that's what's going to develop. I understand that this is a taxonomy. I need this graphic organizer. That study did not show good results. It's the only study that I'm aware of. So I've often wanted, this is another area where I'm trying to move my doc students into doing some more work on why this works, because I'm really interested in transfer of knowledge. So if you learn something very deeply and you understand the expert framework for that, can you then take that to another text and apply it? I think that that's true. We did a study and we found that students that have deep knowledge in an area do transfer that to a brand new text they've never seen in a new topic area. We did find analogical reasoning skills and language skills also were important, those individual differences. So we are working in this area. I don't have a great answer. I would pare it down. Personally, when I create an intervention and when I work with kids, I typically have maybe 3 graphic organizers. I always have a log that's a narrative log for story structure, and they're keeping that in every story they ever do, because kids who have working memory issues are going to have difficulty with the characters. Kids who have trouble, I'll show the slides, I'm getting ahead of myself, but we want to make sure they have the supports for that. And I think they learn over time. Narrative structure is going to always work like this, and I'm going to map out the plot here, So I have a book, worksheets that I use for that. And then for the expository text, I do main idea through most of it. And then for the large macro structure of whatever we're learning, I have a graphic organizer for that. So it depends on the type. I've always wanted to do something where students choose, but after that study was done, I said, maybe not. Here are some of the organizers that are out there and ways of thinking. Like this happens in science, cycles are important. Taxonomies, compare and contrast, cause and effect, problem solution, argument and evidence. This is helpful for writing essays as well. having the students map out these pieces before they begin writing. I also believe in using what I call these macro structures, like for the class that I worked at with the kids who had behavior issues. We had a classroom, it was a big classroom, but we had a timeline that went all the way around the classroom. So every time that they read something, they had a place to put it so they could see in time where did that thing occur. Because otherwise we were just reading all these sporadic things. There was no way to know what, I read this one note that there's no hook for them. So I think that that was very useful, and they enjoyed doing it because they would get to put up, every story we read, something got put up on the wall, and they could see, oh, this is when this happened, or this is how this relates to that. And now we have technology to do this stuff, and kids love making these kinds of timelines. So here again, this is another semantic feature analysis, also useful for knowledge development. This is for the Renaissance, so we have people here, and we have, what did they do, because many of them did multiple tasks during that time. All right. However, knowledge is only part of the answer. We've had a lot of talk about knowledge, and strategy and instruction has kind of gotten thrown out. But as I told the group earlier, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We'll talk. Strategies are very important. Knowledge is important. But we know that struggling readers have less developed background knowledge, and they don't activate their background knowledge even when they have it. So there was a great study done by Marsha Barnes, and then they did a follow-up. Kate Kane did a follow-up. And what they looked at is they taught the kids about a magical land called Gan. It's all made up, and they had to learn like the lake was made of orange juice and like all of these facts, right? And so they taught them to automaticity, that the kids could say exactly what the facts were, right? Well, then they had to read a new story about Gan, and they had to make inferences. The kids who were poor comprehenders could not make those inferences. So we saw distinct differences. So even when they had the knowledge, they tested for it, they taught it, they still had trouble activating it. And that's where strategies come in place. And I think inference generation is really the heart of comprehension. It's being able to activate what you know and integrate it into what the text is asking you to do. Oh, yeah. You have to. And comic strips actually have been shown like this to be a great tool to teach kids about inferencing. Right? Why does the cat look like that? And you have to have a lot of background knowledge about piranhas, right? And what cats do. And explaining that explicitly can help kids to understand what inferencing is and how deep they have to go to actually understand things. Jokes have also been used to do exactly the same thing. So we know that inference, this implied message, it's required in every active communication that we have. And we have people studying it across disciplines for a very long time. Texts are rarely, I would say never, explicit. Those of you who have read a manual for putting a bike together on Christmas Eve will know that that text should be absolutely word by word. It is not. And if we had to read text that was fully explicit, authors would have to write every single, that we'd be reading manuals instead of text. So it's just not doable. And we do know that inference ability predicts current comprehension, but also later comprehension. We can see in very young, so I did a dynamic assessment using inference for kids in 2nd grade. It was able to predict who would have comprehension difficulties in 4th grade. We have different types of inferences, so that we have these local inferences like reference to pronouns, and then global inferences like character feelings, elaborations, themes, cause and effect, and author's purpose. Here gives you an example. This was a study by Kate Kane, Yule and Oak Hill. Oh, sorry, it's not Kane, it's Yule and Oak Hill. Peter lent his coat to Sue because she was cold. Who was very cold, Peter or Sue? Okay? If kids are struggling, poor comprehenders struggle to answer that question, how are they going to do this with this kind of text, right? So these are things that need to be explicitly taught to kids. I did a meta-analysis then on inference generation, and what I found was a 0.58 for general comprehension. For inferential comprehension, we get a 0.68. That's really good. But this is what was interesting, is we get a 0.28, and we didn't even teach. We only taught inference, and we get a 0.28. You never get anything free in education. So I was impressed. But then it became really interesting when I broke down, disaggregated students who have reading difficulties and those who don't. And you see here for inferential, we get a 0.8 for these less skilled readers. So they really need this. The skilled readers are doing okay. They still got something out of it. They got above a 0.5. But look what happened to the literal. This was very surprising to me because I didn't expect it. So the less skilled readers actually, they learned inferencing, but they really did better on their literal comprehension. Why? Why do you think they did better? Like, we didn't teach it.
You can go back and find it. Or innate, it's there.
So, go ahead.
If you're able to infer something that's not said, you have to understand what is said.
Yeah, so they had to go back, find that knowledge, and now they're actually actively engaged in the process, right? I don't know if you guys have worked with students like this, but my students would read, and the whole point was to get to the end. And so teaching them to be cognitively engaged, I think, helped with this literal understanding of the text. We find that teaching, just adding inferential questions is important. There's and doing text clues, we've talked about that, activating and using prior knowledge, teaching character perspective. We did an RCT, randomized controlled trial, with students in 6th through 8th grade. We found that 10 hours of instruction in narrative and expository text and how to infer back and forth between these, we got a 0.46 on a standardized reading comprehension measure, which is pretty good. We took ancient Egypt, so they're reading the Time Warp Trio, old text, and mummies and pyramids. And it was 10 hours of instruction, so not that long at all. We taught them to clarify vocabulary using clue words, find clues about characters and events, make connections within and outside of the text. They had to provide evidence. What's important and what's happening in the text right now, and why is it important? How do you know it's important? So they had to look for words and clues, like repeated information, certain words that the author used to highlight. Those are things that we do naturally. That's why I was telling the kids back in the day, just read it again, because it was natural to me, right? And so, but it is not for the kids. They have to actually learn that and be taught explicitly. And just practicing inferential questions is important. Let's see. Yeah. So in the 1960s, there was an observational study. 20% of the questions teachers gave were inferential. In 1989, this is a textbook, a Basel reader. They looked through all of them, and 57%. So we had this cognitive revolution. That was great. In 1997, this is an observational study, more than 50%. Great. However, they found no instruction for teachers on how to teach the inferencing skill in any of the Basels. So at least they were asking the questions, but there was no information about how to teach that. In 2014, this observational study found that 12 to 15 seconds a day were spent on inferential questions. And we have no idea now. I need somebody to do an observational study for me. Here's some examples for young readers and less skilled readers. Doing sentence level local cohesion, like we saw the Peter and Sue coat story. Here we have where are scientists equals they, and actually having students that have this problem, like if they're not processing this, have them draw a line from scientists to they, understanding that scientists, this is the referent. This is a referent to they. It goes with scientific thinking, because if they're not processing that, they really aren't understanding this text. Now, not all students need this, and some students only need it when they get to very complex texts. So you have to, it's a developmental piece, but also it's a, there are definitely individual differences here that you have to be aware of. Okay. text clue instruction. So this was, I did this with a group of first graders, first grade, and I spent a week with them. And it was the only time where I've really had students, like, they were so engaged in this activity that by day 2, they asked me to go to lunch with them. I had to sit on the book because they wouldn't eat their lunch. So I said, you have to eat your lunch and then we can do more, okay? So, you know, I am an animal that has fur. I like to jump. I can live in the wild or be a pet. You guys have seen this with 20 questions probably back in the day. I have long ears. I like to eat carrots. What am I? Now, what's really interesting is there were a number of students in the class, and some were reading like Harry Potter, like they were really advanced. And then I had kids who definitely seemed like they were probably dyslexic. So in working with these different kids, it was interesting because some of the really good readers would get to this part, like, I am an animal that has fur, I like to jump, and they'd say, oh, this is a kangaroo. And they would continue with kangaroo because they didn't have the cognitive flexibility to change that and update, right? But then I had kids who couldn't read words really well, and the teacher's like, yeah, that's my lower group. They have trouble with, you know, and they were like killing it. And so I was able to show the teacher that for comprehension, these kids were doing really well. And then she started viewing these students differently. I'm like, the problem is they need to get the words off the page. But these other guys that aren't updating, you've got to worry about them for comprehension later. Read alouds are great for this, comics, jokes, and media. All right, so about those roadblocks, because there are a lot in comprehension work. How about differentiation? I really like, this is from Carlisle and Rice, because students have so many different needs. So you could have a kid that has a working memory issue. You could have a kid that has this cognitive flexibility issue where they're not updating. You have a kid that's, they're not regulating well. You can have a kid that, has trouble getting words off the page. You can have someone that has trouble with syntax. There's so many different places that it can go wrong that I like using this structure. So this is what we call poems, and I always want to say poems plus V, which is vocabulary, because I don't want to forget vocabulary here. But preparatory, it supports that background knowledge for kids that don't have background knowledge or don't activate their background knowledge well. Organizational supports working memory. You can see this is the effects we got in our meta-analysis, our current one. Elaborative supports deeper understanding. So these are the inferencing piece. Metacognitive strategies for that self-regulation is 0.48, and summarizing 0.49. So if you cover these, you cover a lot of issues that kids may come with. So having that when you're putting together a multi-component, you're teaching a unit, I would think about having an organizational structure of some kind. I would, think about how am I going to get background knowledge activated. I would always have some summarizing and inference happening there as well. All right, so strategy instruction. Make sure you're teaching those foundational strategies like main idea, but we ultimately want to move to those expert frameworks that we talked about and ways of thinking like an expert does, that disciplinary knowledge, so science, social studies. We want to teach those strategies. For instance, in mathematicians, if you read a math book, A and the, very precise in a math book. So we need to teach how to read a math book differently than how we teach social studies. So that's the kind of strategies we want to move students towards. We need to teach those foundational strategies, but then ultimately we need to teach those disciplinary strategies. We want that gradual release of responsibility. We want the kids to prompt themselves, like I talked about in clarifying. We want them to prompt themselves over time, right? We want it to become ingrained for them, a vehicle for comprehension. Less time may be sufficient. So we calculated, a lot of people have talked about dosage lately in reading across the board, but in comprehension we have some information. More doesn't seem to be better. So after about 20 lessons, we saw a drop off in our meta. So we get about a 0.62, 1 to 20 hours. Or maybe it was 3 to 20 hours. And then after that, you see this drop of 0.23 after 20 hours. So, if you're doing main idea, like once you've taught it, you shouldn't have to prompt and teach it again, right? Once they get it, you can just say, what's the main idea of this? And move on quickly from that, because they need new strategies at that point. And remember that the end goal is not to learn main idea or any other strategy. The main goal is comprehension. That's just a vehicle for comprehending, right? So we don't, like, that they can't get main idea isn't the point. It's can they use main idea to comprehend better on their own. All right. Differentiation. Another way to differentiate is different text. I like to use Lexile. Someone mentioned the Scholastic. I also like Scholastic. It used to be that Scholastic you had to pay for, and Newsela is now, I think you can still get some content in Newsela, but a lot of it now is, how many people have Newsela in their school? Okay. I highly recommend. It's very useful. Differentiation in real time. So if you're working with a group of students or one-on-one, if they have trouble, I start at the paragraph level. So I stop at every paragraph when I'm first working with students, because that should be the idea unit. You'd be shocked to know that there often is not a main idea in those units. When we develop intervention, I don't know why I'm always picked the person. I'm always picked to go find the text. So I go find the text, and I'm like, I'll go through like 10 texts, and I'm like, there's no main idea. Like, the main idea isn't here. I'm like, if we just teach writers to write better, I think we wouldn't have as many comprehension issues. But I do start at the paragraph level, because that's where the idea unit should be, right? If they're struggling and not understanding at that level, then I back up and I go to the sentence level. And at the sentence level, I ask the same questions: who, what, why, at that point. If they're struggling there, and you will find, it depends on the text complexity, how many clauses, how long the sentences are. If they're having trouble there, I go to the phrase level, the idea unit, and we talk about each of those chunks, and then we put the chunks together in the sentence, and then we go back up to the paragraph level. If they're still struggling, I go down to the word level and see if that's where the issue is. Some exercises for syntax for younger kids are cutting up phrases and having them rearrange and talk about how it changes, that the cat chased the dog or the dog chased the cat. How is that different, right? Even older children, you can take those embedded clauses in a complicated sentence and pull them out, and then have them rearrange and talk about how that changes the comprehension of that paragraph or sentence. Another great way to do this is sentence combining. This has been shown to be effective for comprehension and writing. So having all these and then having the students combine those can be very useful. All right, another roadblock is student motivation. They don't want to read. You're asking them to do difficult cognitive. None of us want to do difficult cognitive things. It's like that's human nature, right? And so we're asking kids to do that. And this is kind of some sad data, but what do you notice about those lines? This is fourth grade. They are going down. Our motivation kids are not motivated to read. What about, I showed this earlier, Tennessee is here. You guys are also right with us. 32% of our fourth grade students say that reading is one of their favorite activities. And for 8th grade, got worse for Tennessee. We are definitely doing something bad in middle schools here. And for you guys, where are you guys? I found you earlier. 26. So you guys are right there at the national average. But still, only 26% of kids say they like to read in 8th grade. We do have reading motivation interventions, point 2. But the reason, we're not dancing in the street, but these are things that you can do with it's not going to take more time usually to do these kinds of interventions. Offering students choice, either in the book they're reading or offering them choice with the outcome that you're asking them to do. Like, they can choose between showing comprehension by answering questions or doing a poster for you or a website. Like, there are different ways, authentic ways we can get kids to synthesize text and then use it for an authentic purpose. And giving them that choice can really then engage them to read more. We did a study, this is a mindset study of kindergartners. We taught them just a few brief lessons for over 6 weeks on if you work harder, your brain grows. We had old Ziggy had a growth mindset, Nash, not so much. The kids all said they were like Ziggy at the beginning, which was great. But we also had these self-regulation charts. So we had writing ones too, but these are like, I can do it. Mistake, I made a mistake, great. Like they were taught the mistakes were the best thing ever. I can use my strategies to help it. Bring it on, I love a challenge. And what we found for basic writing, it's a good effect size. For conceptual writing, crazy effect size. And for completing this challenging writing task, what we ask the kids to do is take a more challenging task each time. So at the beginning, the treatment and control both took on average 3 times. After 3 times, they said, no, thank you. I don't want to do any more hard work. Afterwards, the treatment group, the control group stayed the same. They took 3 hard tasks. The control group took 7 to 8 tasks out of the 10. So they were willing to go double what the other students, more than double, of the difficult tasks. So they were persisting through. And actually, that's what happened with this conceptual writing. Those kids were pushing through on the writing exam. They didn't give up when things were difficult. They really thought it through. So we can change motivation, and I think we need to think about it. We all talk about it, but we're not assessing it. And we're not really focused on that piece, and it's really important. I do believe this quote. I'm definitely the turtle. All right, limited time. I do like to end sessions with you guys taking what you've learned, and if you could just do one thing if you're in the classroom. And I really like, this is B.J. Fogg, he's a habit expert, and this is also talked about in Freddie Hubert's book, but you've got to make whatever habit you're trying to put in place in your classroom, because systems and routines are the only way you're going to make changes in comprehension. So how do you do that? Well, first you have to make it easy to do, easy and likely to do. Then you've got to have a prompt for it. So maybe you have an idiom up every day when they come back from recess. But the biggest part is that you've got to celebrate and track what you do. So just having kids put a star on the calendar that we did our idioms for the day, or we did our word work for the day, or our vocabulary, and getting a streak, kids love streaks, that you will get in your vocabulary, whatever you've decided is important, it will be done every day because they love those streaks. So I'd just like you to think about that small change. How are you going to do it? When are you going to do it? How will you celebrate that with your kids? Those are the summing up of what we did. And then resources. I highly recommend. I have 2 copies, one at work, one at home, and I have a digital copy. That's how important this book is. So this is truly a research to practice book. You will get the most current research, and it is really developed into practice. Nancy is also coming out in January with a workbook that you'll be able to copy the worksheets from. That's coming out in January to go with that. Vocabulary resources. Then our knowledge resources, knowledge. And then IES is the other place you want to go, the What Works Clearinghouse. So their practice guides truly will tell you what's going on with research to practice and what you should do. We'll give you 5 recommendations to make in your classes. These are some of my favorites, but there are others. All right, and if you are interested in a PhD, please come see me because I need people to do studies. Thank you.